What's up, guys? So I'm back for another video, and today's video I think is going to be a bit unique. I don't believe there are any other videos on YouTube about the Mazworx CD09 swap into the FRS BRZ 86. So now that I've finished that swap and I've gone to the track with it, I wanted to make a video, guys, to tell you guys about the quality of the kit, the difficulty of the install, as well as some tips for installing it, and my overall impressions on the road and on the track of this kit. So for those of you who are not familiar, the CD09 is a very common transmission to put into high horsepower cars. The CD09 was originally found in the 350Z and the G35. The reason that that transmission is used is because it is very durable even in its stock form. It can handle up to about 700 horsepower without breaking, as opposed to the stock transmission, which some of you who have followed my channel for a while know that I have already had issues with the stock transmission, even in stock power. The transmission in this car, although it has very smooth and nice shifts, is just very weak. It's like made of tinfoil. It's just awful. So for people who are running higher horsepower in this car, it's a very common swap to put a CD09 into this car. And the easiest one-stop solution for that swap is the Mazworx CD09 kit, which I'll be talking about today. Now, what's included in this kit is the transmission itself with a custom bell housing that fits it onto the FA20, as well as the mounting material and a carbon fiber drive shaft. It's all that you need to do the install. I was thoroughly impressed with the quality of all of the things. So first of all, the carbon fiber drive shaft looks amazing. It's gorgeous and it's carbon fiber, cool, very lightweight. The transmission itself, more specifically the bell housing, is a very nice quality. It looks very well custom engineered, and I was thoroughly impressed with the quality of the entire kit. I don't want to go as far as to say that it justified the price tag, because this kit is a very high price tag, but I was not disappointed when I looked at all the materials and everything that was included in the kit. Now, as far as the install itself, I can easily say that this was one of the most difficult installs that I've done on this car. And that includes installing the turbo kit, that includes installing the big brake kit. Everything that you see on here I did, and I can easily say the hardest install that I've done is that transmission. And the reason for that is because you're putting a transmission that was not originally meant for this car into this car, and it requires a lot of cutting and custom work and hammering out things to make sure that everything fits. So I'll tell you guys the tips that I learned throughout this process and kind of just give you guys an idea of what is required to install this transmission. As far as what's required, you need to be able to weld, and you need to be able to either solder or crimp or any of that kind of stuff to get wires to go together, but I prefer soldering because I think it's the most long-term and durable solution. The transmission swap into this car was pretty difficult, mainly because the transmission is very large and the transmission tunnel on this car is very small. You have to hammer out a bit of the transmission tunnel to get it to fit nicely. Also, one of the hardest parts, the gear indicator and the reverse sensor, those get very close to the transmission tunnel and oftentimes will hit the transmission tunnel during the install, which really risks damaging those wires. So the first tip that I'm going to tell you guys on how to install this is, if you look at the gear indicator and the reverse sensor, you can undo a plastic piece and pull out the end of the sensors, making them effectively shorter and also removing the most fragile part, which is the wires. So if you do that, they're smaller, so it's easier to install, and you have the least fragile part out of the way. So that's my first tip. The order of operations for installing this transmission is as follows. So basically, you remove the stock transmission, and then you cut out the pieces in the transmission tunnel, which are indicated in the instruction manual on Mazworx website, and then you put the CD09 into the car for one time, just so you can figure out where the mounts are and where you need to weld. Then you remove it, weld everything, and put the transmission in for its final time. Anybody who's installed a transmission before, you know that basically the hardest part of the transmission install is getting the spline of the transmission to line up with the spline of the clutch. So a tip that I learned from my friends over at Kaiju Motorsports, if you're in Las Vegas, hit them up. They're extremely helpful and extremely smart and know a lot about this stuff. You can remove the clutch and the pressure plate and the clutch disc from the car, from the engine, and then put the transmission on. The reason that's helpful is because with those parts removed, there's nothing for the spline on the transmission to line up to. Because the first time that you install the CD09, you don't need it to be functional, you just need it to be in the right place so you can do the mounts. If you remove the clutch and the pressure plate, then you have a significantly easier time installing the transmission and figuring out where it needs to line up, and then you can remove it, and then you put the clutch disc and the pressure plate back for the final time, and you put more of the effort into getting it in the final time because that's the time that it needs to be functional. If that was too complicated, long story short, the first time you install the CD09, remove the pressure plate and the clutch disc so it's easier to put on, and then the second time, put everything back and do it right. That was a huge help just because it's such a pain to get those pieces to line up. I've always had issues with that when I was installing transmissions, so that was very helpful. Other than that, the last thing about the install that I want to mention is I've talked to other people who have done this install and they have the same issue as me, which is that the custom mounts that you have to weld onto this car do not sit flush with the transmission tunnel. Even if you do all the recommended cutting and grinding down and all the kind of stuff that they require you to do in order to get this to fit right, the mounts sit like this and the transmission tunnel sits like this. So there's a bit of a gap between where the mount is and where the transmission tunnel is. So if you're going to do the welding yourself, or if you're going to get a welder to come do the welding, which are basically the only two options, you have to be aware that you might have to put metal in between the two and weld the pieces together so that there's a connection across the entire mount, because they do not sit flush, so you can put metal in between in order to get them to weld it up properly to where it's strong. Another option is to hammer out the transmission tunnel from the inside of the car so that the transmission tunnel caves in a little bit and then sits more flush with the mounts. Now, one other tip about the install. When you are putting the final touches on the transmission and you're tying everything up, making sure it all looks good, I would highly recommend putting Loctite on the bolts that hold the shifter onto the transmission. There are 4 bolts, they have spacers. Please put Loctite on them. Ask me how I know. Because it fell apart on the track. For those of you who watched the channel before, you will know this is the second time I've had a shifter fall apart on the track because I did not Loctite those bolts. So hear me out. Loctite the bolts. Loctite the bolts that hold the shifter onto the transmission. Do it. Just do it. End of story. But that's about it for the install. Now on to the driving and the experience of this transmission. So I think that the number one thing that people are curious about when doing the swap is, does the CD09 feel anywhere as good as the stock FRS BRZ 86 transmission? Because this transmission is known for having a very good feel to it. It's very notchy, you know when you're in the gear, all that kind of stuff. And I can honestly tell you that the short shifter that's on this kit feels very good and honestly comparable to the FRS BRZ stock transmission. It is very notchy, you know when you're in the gear, and it does feel good. So I was not disappointed feeling the shifts. Maybe it's a little bit less solid in its shifts than the stock transmission, but not significantly. It felt very good. The shifter feels very good. Now, the other thing that's talked about with this transmission, which is definitely true, is the fact that it's loud. Supposedly, it's not loud when you get the double plate of the clutch, but I have the single plate clutch, which is the normal FRS stock style clutch, and it is loud. And I've also heard this from other people who have the kit, that when you're driving around, especially when you have it in neutral or when you put the clutch in, you can hear stuff spinning in the transmission, you can hear the clutch spinning, and it's loud. It just makes annoying noises. So if this is your daily driver, you're gonna get some annoying noises out of it, that's for sure. However, after my first track day and after some time just driving the car, the noise has gone down significantly. So there is still noise. Most of the time it's when I am either going into like first gear, releasing the clutch going into first gear, sometimes when I'm in neutral or when I first put it into neutral or when I put the clutch in. But all of the noises have been significantly reduced since when I first installed it. It was very noisy in the beginning, and I don't know if it just takes everything to just settle properly or what, but the noise has gone down, but it definitely is noisy. Now the final thing about the experience with driving with the CD09 into the car, and this is also something that has been confirmed by somebody else, so it's not just me and my shitty shifting habits. When you're shifting into 5th gear on this car, especially when you're driving aggressively like on the track, 5th gear can be hard to find. Basically, the reason for that is because the shifter on this car is the same as any other shifter. It's like an H pattern, an extended H, so it's like 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, and then reverse is here and down. When you push down on the shifter, it accesses the reverse, so it's all the way over and then down. Now the issue is when you're shifting, if you push the shifter as far to the right as it goes, and then push up, which is theoretically where 5th gear would be, the problem is it starts to go past 5th gear, kind of going towards reverse gear. Not that it actually goes into reverse or anything like that, but it goes just a little bit past. So if you're pushing very hard and then push up, it will not go into gear. There's no gear. You have to push it lightly, just like a little bit lightly, and then go up, and then it'll find 5th gear. The problem is when you are just going past bus stop at Button Willow and you're now cornering and around the sweeper and you're going very fast and you need to find 5th gear, it is very hard to be casual and light and soft and put the car into 5th gear. So it does take a bit of work to learn where 5th gear is when you're driving aggressively. You have to take a breath, calm yourself, and go into 5th gear. Other than that, everything on the transmission feels great. Like I said, the shifts feel great, the transmission feels great, the noise goes down after you start to drive it. Overall, my impressions about this kit is that it is a very nice kit, and it is a very good solution for people wanting to run high horsepower in this car without changing their transmission out every month. It is a very high quality kit. It looks very good. It comes with very nice parts, including the carbon fiber drive shaft. It feels very good. The shifter feels very good. Overall, there's just minor quirks like the noise of the clutch moving, like I mentioned earlier, that the car kind of has a little bit of trouble getting into fifth, and that's about it. So I really hope that you guys enjoyed this video. If you have any more questions, because I know this is an expensive kit, and the reason I tried to do this video is to help you guys decide if this is an option that you wanted to go down this path, leave any questions, comments, concerns in the comments below, and I will make a strong effort to answer them. Otherwise, thank you guys so much for watching this video. Let me know if you guys have any suggestions for videos you want to see in the future. Make sure you guys subscribe, follow me on Instagram, and I will see you guys later.